Welcome to the first Dean's Lecture for 2020. It's a great privilege and honour to have you all with us. No one told me about Dean's Lectures before I took this job, but it is one of the highlights of being the Dean of this illustrious graduate school. So it's with great pleasure that I present Professor Jayne Osgood tonight to present that lecture. But before we do that, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Wurundjeri people from the Kulin Nations, and acknowledge ancestors past, present and emerging, and pay my respect to any Indigenous people that may be here tonight. So because this is an early childhood themed lecture tonight, we'd like to acknowledge one of our own staff members, our highly acclaimed early childhood professor in Nicola Yellen, who is the recipient of the 2020 Critical Perspectives on Early Education Distinguished Scholar Award at the American Research Education Association Conference in 2020. It is a really, really big deal. This is an annual award that's given to a scholar researcher who has made significant and sustained contributions to the dissemination and understanding of critical perspectives on early childhood education at local, national and international levels. The purpose of the award is twofold: to honour scholars whose work has informed and influenced critical inquiry in early childhood education, and to draw attention to the work of CPECE, which is the Critical Perspectives group, in the context of educational research. And so we feel honoured that an MGSE professor has been acclaimed at the international level. But I got to see a couple of the referee statements that people wrote about Nicola, and it is a big deal, a really big deal. So congratulations, Nicola, it's fantastic. And I look forward to being in San Francisco when you're presented with that award and sharing a drink or two with you. The innovation I talked about tonight, even though this is the Dean's Lecture, we ask people, our fabulous staff, at the start of each year, at the end of each previous year, to nominate people that they think would be fantastic for our Dean's Lectures. And so tonight we're going to give the opportunity to introduce Jayne to Dr. Sonia Arndt, who has joined us 4 months ago from the University of Waikato, and so worked with Jayne for a long time, or worked with Jayne's work, and certainly been well known to her. So thank you for nominating Jayne. It's great that we've been able to bring that to fruition. And so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Sonia Arndt to come forward and introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Jim. And first of all, congratulations, Nicola. Thank you. And thanks for the warm welcome this afternoon, this evening, and for the opportunity even to invite Professor Jayne Osgood from the University of Middlesex in London. Jayne, I want to thank you for coming here today, and I want to just introduce you briefly to everybody. Jayne's been an inspiration and a role model for me and for many of my colleagues in many ways and for many years, as Jim's just mentioned. She supports our stance to strengthen teacher identity, the professionalism and working conditions of early childhood teachers, and to help to reconceptualise the complexities of early childhood education, to raise both the status and the attention that we give to teachers on a local and a global level. In her research, Jayne's been instrumental in forming understandings of how contemporary methodologies and research practices can be shaped and reframed by feminist new materialism. Her concerns with issues of social justice, early childhood policy, curricular frameworks, pedagogical approaches resonate very well with our work here at MGSE and beyond. She extends understandings about the workforce, which we've just recently had some work also show is a huge issue for early childhood teachers, as well as in other places in the world, with families, with what is the child and what is childhood in the early years contexts. Jayne's published very widely in the postmodernist work, in the post-human work, and also around early childhood professionalism, which is the work we've been using for a very long time. And you can see lists of her publications on her website and on the bio that came out with today. She also is a visiting scholar at a number of universities, and edits high-level journals, including what you might know, Gender and Education, the Researching Educational Research Methodologies, that's the right name, right? Journal that comes out of Norway and is on the international board for Nicola Yellen's Contemporary Issues in Early Childhood journal as well. Today, Jayne's going to show you, and me, all of us, how we might reconfigure diversity in early childhood contexts by thinking about the everyday and how that matters. She points to the crucial notion of moving beyond what we might see as narrow formulations of what diversity is in early childhood, and attends to the possibilities that arise when we think more deeply about the ordinary routines and the everyday situations in early childhood settings. I'm honoured and very, very warmly welcome Professor Jayne Osgood and her Dean's lecture, Alternative Understandings about How Matter Comes to Matter in the Baby Room.
What a fabulous welcome. Thank you so, so much. And thank you. Really do feel very honoured and very, very grateful to be here. It feels like a very big deal, so I'll try not to let you all down. I'm really, really thrilled to have an opportunity to be here to share my current research. So this is research that's been going on for the last couple of years and it's ongoing. And it really is my attempt to try to put theory and philosophy into practice in early childhood research, which is perhaps easier said than done. So I'm busy supporting my PhD students to do research framed by feminist new materialism, but it seems to me that it's really important that as professors and supervisors, we need to get our hands dirty doing that stuff too. So that's what I'm going to share with you is, some extracts from me, literally on the floor in the nursery in London, trying to put theory to work, to think differently about childhood, and specifically to think differently about diversity. So what it is, this paper is an attempt to reconfigure diversity in inverted commas by turning attention to everyday matter. So specifically, I work with noodles, spit, sound, movement, and embodiment to argue for an opened out view of diversity. So the aim then is, hold on, sorry. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm here for. Okay. So the aim is to examine how we might move beyond narrow formulations of diversity and attend to the possibilities that open up through thinking deeply and sensing ordinary routines and mundane situations. And there are many of them in early childhood contexts. So my work is currently inspired by Donna Haraway and particularly her invitation to tell different stories. So what I'm attempting to do is to tell different stories about childhood diversity than those that are typically generated within curriculum frameworks, inspection regimes and pedagogical practices. There are some very firm and established ideas about what diversity in early childhood is within those realms. And I want to push against those and see where else we might go with the idea of diversity. So this requires then that attention is paid to how these stories come about, how they come to hold currency and the effects that they generate. So this paper therefore considers the material, semiotic, discursive and affective entanglements that unfold specifically around festivals. Now, anybody who knows anything about early childhood, even if you don't work in early childhood, you'll know that festivals and celebrations are a big deal. They're a mainstay of early childhood practice. So I thought that that would be a really interesting route in to look at how diversity manifests within early childhood settings, and specifically focusing on materiality and affect. So this paper, there's a series of papers. I deal with Christmas and Shrove Tuesday and Hanukkah and whatever. This one is Chinese New Year. Okay, and it's Chinese New Year in the baby room. And what's interesting about research with babies is there isn't very much of it. And what there is framed by developmentalist logic. So this is a very different way of looking at how babies are entangled with spaces, matter, places, and how diversity plays out within their miniature worlds. So early childhood is widely recognised as a time when prejudice and bias start to emerge in how children experience and make sense of the world. And the damaging effects of stereotyping, prejudice, bias and discrimination have been the subject of decades of research in early childhood education, which in turn has informed pedagogical practices that endeavour to foreground inclusivity, fairness and equity, all very worthy and important pursuits. However, equity discourses have been called into question because of the often unintentional effects they have to effectively invisibilise difference. And here I'm drawing on the work of Kerry Robinson and Chris Jones-Dias. Where we treat all children the same here becomes the mantra shaping nursery practice. Educators become excused from dealing with difficult differences or taboo issues. So in the UK, we have the unique child, which is enshrined in our early years foundation stage curriculum. And this focuses attention on the individualised child, the unique child, a child expected to perform against standardised developmental ideas about what children should be and do at different ages and stages, the normative child, what is normal. So uniqueness then becomes overshadowed by a neoliberal concern for normativity. The nursery that I went to, which I will share with you throughout the rest of this presentation, offered a really interesting site in which to explore some of this and to start to think about whether it's possible to rework ideas about diversity and difficult differences in early childhood. So the children at this nursery are very diverse in terms of age, ethnicity, gender and social class background. And the nursery was rated outstanding in its most recent inspection and was especially praised for demonstrating an excellent, I quote, an excellent knowledge of the needs of every child to assist them to becoming confident learners. As a result, children become deeply engrossed in practical and creative tasks and are encouraged to take risks and to assess the risks themselves. So the inspection report also noted that the nursery effectively engages parents, particularly around the areas of diversity and inclusion. So one powerful illustration of parental engagement was through festivals and celebrations, which are a regular feature of nursery life, carefully mapped against the early years foundation stage curriculum, so it's become deeply embedded in the pedagogy. With a specific underlying objective to address diversity and inclusivity, and in which parents are invited to contribute their own stories, artefacts and knowledge. So it's that show and tell, bring us what you can from your home. And so for this reason, the study took festivals and celebrations as the context in which to undertake research, which sought to foreground how children are materially discursively entangled with diversity. So it's not diversity or it's not an identity that belongs to an individual human subject. It's something that gets produced within these micro moments within the nursery setting, which I hope to go on to unpack for those of you not so familiar with the theory. Okay, so the ease and familiarity of putting celebrations to pedagogical use in early childhood settings is well established, although there remains concern that settings should exercise critical reflexivity in how it is undertaken. Choices about which festivals to include must recognise the potentially marginalising effects of including some religious festivals and not others, and the fetishisation and exotic othering of cultural groups that can unwittingly occur. So notwithstanding these concerns, an organisation in the UK, Early Years Careers, have this to say about festivals. Festivals are a great way for children, parents and practitioners to celebrate their beliefs and share their culture and religion with others. Many settings celebrate festivals or events such as Christmas, Diwali and Hanukkah, providing many activities based around the celebration for all children to access. It's important that practitioners use the celebrations to talk about the meaning behind it and talk about the different religions. Many children will enjoy activities to celebrate different religions, but do not understand why they're doing it. This is vital in fully promoting an inclusive environment and enabling children to respect and learn about a range of religion. So this concern to verbalise and to make meaning and reason the significance of different festivals offers an interesting point of departure when research is undertaken in the baby room with pre-verbal children, thereby presenting a rich and complex assemblage in which to explore the affects and embodiment of Chinese New Year as what Haraway would term materialised figuration. So difficult differences, and we have a thing in the UK, you may have something similar here, called the prevent duty and fundamental British values, fundamental Australian values maybe, but so complicating the discursive landscape in which diversity and difficult differences are produced is this duty, a legal duty, the prevent duty, which became law in the UK in 2015. Simply, the duty requires that all schools and early years providers must show due regard to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. In order to protect children, early years providers must be alert to any cause for concern in a child's life at home or elsewhere, including expression of extremist views. Where a cause for concern is noted, the early years provider is required to refer the child and their family to a local safeguarding team for investigation. The introduction of the duty has been met with controversy, as you can imagine, within the media. It has generated lively academic debate and caused outrage amongst human rights groups. The duty is criticised for disproportionately targeting Muslims and generating and deepening racial tensions, which has become ever more the case since Brexit and in the lead up to Brexit. So teachers' unions have been amongst some of the most vociferous about the inappropriateness and damaging implications of the duty for teachers, children, and their communities. So within the specific context of early childhood education, though, the duty is particularly troubling, since it presents young children in contradictory ways, as on the one hand vulnerable and in need of protection, but also as potential terrorists in the making. Within Prevent, vulnerability describes the condition of being capable of being injured, difficult to defend, open to moral or ideological attack. Within Prevent, the word describes factors and characteristics associated with being susceptible to radicalisation. It's quite, there's the context. So the duty has generated considerable tension and anxiety for early years educators in their everyday practices. What do you do with this? Particularly where their work is driven by concerns for social justice and inclusion. The Prevent duty provides a disquieting backdrop against which nurseries are endeavouring to pursue child-centred pedagogies that are attuned and sensitive to difficult differences, so they're placed in an almost impossible position. So since its introductions, nurseries have been offered advice and reassurance from sector organisations about how to implement this legal duty. And the resounding message is that Prevent and the related fundamental British values represent nothing especially new. It's what you've been doing anyway, so don't be alarmed. Rather, they're a mere re-articulation of personal, social and emotional development goals that are embedded within the early years foundation stage curriculum. However, the ideological framework underpinning the Prevent duty and fundamental British values is deeply problematic, since it poses a direct threat to prevailing theories and philosophies that are associated with early childhood practice, that constructs childhood as a time for playful experimentation, discovery, subversion, and exploration. How do you get to do those things if you're under surveillance with a Prevent duty? So young children, and specifically Muslim boys, are constructed as worthy of suspicion and inevitably subject to greater censure and judgment. And an example of this is the cucumber case. Now, I don't know if any of you are aware of this. A 4-year-old Asian boy was referred to Prevent by an early years teacher on the grounds of his mispronunciation of cucumber. The teacher had heard cookabomb. And there was a huge furore, and it attracted huge media attention, but it's, furthermore, the duty and fundamental British values places an ever greater emphasis upon adult educators to orchestrate learning environments and pedagogical opportunities to cultivate very narrowly specific messages about diversity. It's a minefield. How do you navigate this? So that certain cultural values and practices are valued over others, and it's a difficult space to occupy. So in response to the prevent duty, registered early years providers are encouraged to create a cultural diversity environment in which the diverse needs of all children can be met. Quickly though, this cultural diversity environment that enables the needs of all children from diverse cultures and backgrounds to be met becomes co-opted as a space to promote fundamental British values. So again, this is Early Years Careers, which is the sector organisation supporting teachers. Ofsted now requires all settings to promote actively the British values and embed these into practice. The 4 fundamental values are democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty and mutual respect, and tolerance for those with different faiths and beliefs. Although named British values, these values are inclusive of all religions, cultures and ethnic backgrounds. But as the cooker bomb case illustrates, perhaps not in equal measure. They aim to teach children about the importance of self-esteem, managing their own behaviour and respect for others. The British values are embedded into the foundation stage curriculum through personal, social, emotional development and important in promoting a cultural diversity environment where all children belong. So far, I've sought to map the discursive landscape about diversity in early childhood as it plays out in the English context and as it's articulated through policy, media and curriculum texts. The deep political motivations and ideological agendas that course through these texts and hence shape early childhood practices are traceable and unsettling. But it's my contention that by keeping a hold of these matters of concern, it's possible to pursue generative possibilities when attention is paid to the ways in which diversity manifests differently and through routine events and everyday happenings within a London nursery during a specific festival. So this paper moves on to address these questions. So how else might we engage with ideas about diversity in early childhood than those set out in what I've just outlined? What happens if we make space for other non-anthropocentric, non-human-centred stories about diversity in early childhood to find expression? What if we make matter our starting place, materiality, and think deeply about how matter matters in early childhood and what it can teach us about diversity? What happens if we take matter seriously as co-producing diversity in early childhood? Can diversity be experienced as processes, as little becomings that manifest through entanglements that are sensed and felt? If so, what generative possibilities are there to view diversity as constantly on the move, not fixed to a human subject, but shifting, sliding, mutating, and constantly becoming? So as a way into addressing these questions, I briefly return to the Ofsted report from this nursery that praises the staff for, it's here, encouraging children to develop skills in manipulating and exploring objects and materials from a very early age. They enjoy exploring materials firsthand. For example, younger children learn how to foam up bubbles in a water tray, while older children use mud to build homes for toy insects. In the outdoor mud kitchen, children mix water with mud to change its consistency. Staff pay close attention to each child's understanding and are quick to adjust teaching to meet children's needs. Staff promote swift progress and take appropriate action to close gaps in children's learning. All excellent. as far as Ofsted's concerned. So within this extract of the inspection report, it's possible to trace a range of dominant discourses, from child-centeredness, scaffolding pedagogy, the development of fine motor skills, and so on, all of which foreground a humanist view of early childhood education, that what unfolds within the nursery necessarily rests upon human intentionality of both the teacher and the child. i.e. it's the teacher who selects the materials that will be manipulated and the children who change the consistency of the water. So I want to dwell on what else might be at play in this scenario. How do the materials and the water shape experiences and ideas about diversity? And how are policies, frameworks, and legal requirements materially, discursively circulating in the mud kitchen? What else is going on here other than a narrow concern with children's acquisition of skills and abilities? In what ways can such ordinary events, such as the water-mud moment, offer us other ways to tell different stories about how childhood and difficult differences are produced? It is to these other stories that I want to turn attention throughout the remainder of my paper. So, as I have stressed, the objective of this paper is to tell different stories, stories that take matters seriously so that ideas about diversity might be rethought. It involves a mode of inquiry that invites curiosity and experimentation, and an investment in what Haraway terms world-making. She said, I quote, "The point is to get at how worlds are made and unmade in order to participate in the processes, in order to foster some forms of life and not others." So it's deeply political. So this mode of researching and being with children stresses that the researcher is implicated, infected and affected, not separate from that which is being researched. More recently, in 2016, Haraway warns against thoughtlessness and instead urges the practice of tentacular thinking, deep thoughtfulness, that invites researchers to become wayfarers and recognise themselves as entangled. The task becomes to track lines and cultivate what she terms response ability, the ability to respond in each moment ethically in the muddle of thinking. So for Haraway, cultivating responsibility is high-stakes training of the mind and imagination to go visiting, to venture off the beaten path, to meet unexpected non-natal kin, and to strike up conversations, to pose and respond to interesting questions, to propose together something unanticipated, to take up the unasked-for obligations of having met. So she sees this as a very urgent need to change the story. Researchers need to narrate and to think outside human-centric accounts of the world. Storytelling can nurture or invent or discover, or it can be cobbling together ways for living and dying well. Again, Haraway. So Haraway's been a real inspiration, and her SF philosophy has really shaped the direction of this research that I'm undertaking. And I do that in order to creatively find fissures between discourses, frameworks, and practices. So mapping the discursive landscape, then what do we do? How do we actively participate in these world-making practices to shift our thinking and doing around diversity? Or endeavouring to enact Anna Zing's radical curiosity, which invites wonder at the everyday, unremarkable and mundane, where diversity manifests in unanticipated ways. So the task then becomes to think, to figure and to story. And to that end, I seek to translate curiosity into unconventional, unfamiliar, experimental and uncertain practices to reach potentially more generative ways to see and be in the world. This doesn't look like research, and the practitioners are deeply sceptical about what I'm doing, as you'll see in what unfolds. But it's about questioning, deeply thinking and questioning what's unfolding in those spaces and not taking it for granted. But also not going in looking for what we know we're going to find. So it's kind of taking on this radical curiosity. So what other stories can be told from the enabling environment of the inclusive baby room? All of that needs to be unpacked and problematized. So in a quest for other stories, critique must remain in play. I don't think we can't not critique. It's important to deconstruct and problematise. The prevent duty and fundamental British values are shaped by political agendas, which actively inform ideas about normativity and deviance. What and who is safe or fearful. So it remains imperative that discourses that position nurseries, staff, families, children within regulatory regimes and subject them to what Stephen Ball terms the terrors of performativity are named and dismantled. At the same time, though, it's important to be open to multiple and experimental ways of not knowing that formulate collectively shared problems. So borrowing from Hilary Lynn's Taguchi, she urges that we need ways, multiple ways, to avoid getting stuck in familiar ways of thinking and doing. So attempts to reconfigure how we might approach diversity in early childhood contexts is helpful. By charting the terrain, experimenting, and resisting the comforts of recognition, reflection, and identification, my suggestion is that we might go beyond what we think we know and produce knowledge differently. So beyond critiquing the prevent duty and fundamental British values, to a deep, tentacular immersion, a curious practice that allows for looking at the world with rather than at, again, Haraway. So Haraway's practices of deep thoughtfulness and off-the-beaten-path method requires that we then move beyond identifying discourses and work towards cultivating a heightened awareness to the conditions of possibility in which we're located. Of off-the-beaten-path practices, Haraway stresses the act of visiting for feminist new materialism, which invites adventures in diffractive reconfiguring and opportunities to reassemble what we think we see and what we think we know, to generate new knowledges and ways of viewing the world and our place within it. The generative potential available to reconfigure diversity as something that's sensed, enacted, embodied, and constantly transformed is actually really exciting. And it's an exciting departure from naming and deconstructing discourses that can be found in textual representations such as policies, laws, duties, and verbal accounts of what diversity is. So diversity, research around diversity can involve interviewing teachers and gathering some account of what we think diversity is and ethnographic observations of children. But actually, if we recognise our implicated, affected and infected place, then how is it being produced within these micro moments? So this mode of inquiry privileges wayfaring, visiting and creative experimentation over critique, but commitments to interrogating power and inequity remain in play. So this paper will go on to report upon attempts to embrace off-the-beaten-path wayfaring methods that invite the researcher, me, to embrace not knowing and being open to surprises. Such an approach demands that human-centred concerns with child-centred pedagogies and educator subjectivities are displaced. Instead, embracing flattened ontologies insist that all elements in a research assemblage, the noodles, the spit, the space, the place, the environment, as well as the circulation and material enactment of discourses, share equal emphasis and inform understandings of children and ourselves as entangled. So when this framework is taken up, diversity manifests in unexpected ways. When diversity is approached from a position of not knowing, it allows for the world and young children's place in the world to be considered more expansively. So this is what Haraway urges when she suggests we engage in deep hanging out, which alongside deep thoughtfulness allows for tentacular thinking, feeling, doing, one thing, you can't separate them, within research encounters. So this theoretical framework insists that attention is paid to micro events, ordinary routines and mundane situations, sensing intensities and what Maggie McClure termed glow moments and uncomfortable affects. It's an invitation to reimagine, re-encounter, re-sense diversity from the practice of deep hanging out in a nursery. So going into the field with a sense of not knowing and embracing openness and being willing to let go of a sense of expertise represents disquieting challenges to the wizened researchers. When you've been going into nursery settings for 20 years, you kind of do know what you're going to look for, but you put aside that and try to go in with a different heightened sensitivity to what else might be there. So it's only by surrendering to the unanticipated, the not known and the not yet known that other stories become available. I could not know what might be generated from the entanglement of camera, more than child-sized researcher, right-angled cushions, glass thresholds, health and safety regulations, Chinese New Year, noodles, London, building site. You've put me off. Muslim educators, Cantonese music, the prevent duty, early afternoon, treasure cushion, weather conditions, the foundation stage curriculum, bath mat, nappy change, and. The task, though, becomes to take account of the entanglements and what they produce. So, inspired by Kind and Holtman and Lens Taguchi and Nordstrom, I wanted to find ways to register photographic equipment as something other than a research tool to capture representations of what was going on, to allow for creative experimentation away from the usual practice of capturing evidence. I don't know if this is the case in Australia, but in English nurseries, children are captured the whole time, portfolio, kind of capturing their developmental progress, and its photography is kind of central. So I wanted to find a way for photography to be part of the research methodology, but not in the conventional sense. So then I stumbled across this, the Polaroid cube, and it was particularly appealing to me because it's incredibly robust. It can withstand water, or more importantly, in the case of the baby room, spit, and being dropped, or again, in the case of the baby room, being thrown or sat upon. And it captures both instant still and video action recording. So it's quite cute. It's just kind of blended in. So this was my research companion, this Polaroid cube, the monkey. So the nursery embraced the educative potential of Chinese New Year in pronounced ways. It was one of many festivals, but this was particularly exciting and multisensory. So I was greeted by an invitation to the baby room where I quote, "Something really Chinesey is going on. Quick, come." But I was only allowed access upon the condition that I put some of these on. Plastic covers to protect my outdoor shoes, or to protect the carpet from the dirt and germs that were on my outside shoes. And this was for health and safety reasons. Okay, so sifting through this enormous box of blue shoe covers, it quickly became obvious that they were not fit for purpose. They were holey and torn from frequent use. Hence, my shoes were removed and the room is entered in socks, in breach of some sort of health and safety rule, but nevertheless, that's what happened. So crossing the threshold to the baby room, I'm confronted by an intensely multisensory Chinese-themed experience. Posters, soft furnishings, lanterns, calendars, menus, horoscopes, various textures of red materials. Chinese music was playing and the smell of recently cooked egg noodles. A welcome to Bumblebee room was extended by a female, mature, South Indian Muslim educator. At the level of the child on the floor, sat on one of 3 bath mats, which had been set down to capture the noodle mess. Animated and prolonged engagement in the multisensory noodle chopstick wok bath mat exploration. Babies, upright, right-angled cushions behind to catch their fall if they should flip backwards, which is a risk when bodies become sitting bodies. Corporeal, prolonged immersion, grabbing, lassoing, teasing and pulling the noodles. Handfuls of noodles in the mouth, hands, ears, hair, cold, sticky bits of noodle embedded in sock yarn and bath mat fibres. Quickly, the monkey camera cube held the attention of 2 7-month-old babies. The cube was greeted with animated ooh, 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 ah, 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 clapping and burbling. The adult educators instinctively made connections between the monkey stand camera cube with the monkey-like noises. They further assumed that the year of the monkey was intentionally represented by the monkey camera, but it was actually a happy coincidence. So the Polaroid monkey cube took a series of shots of the two noodle-playing babies. And one baby, this one here, grabbed the monkey, realizing that the head was attached to the body by a magnet, and began enjoying the pull of the magnetic force and the clicking sound of metal on metal. He then began mouthing the stand and subsequently the head, the camera cube. I'd imagined that I might find some video footage, some interesting data of the inside of his mouth, but his two teeth had deactivated the camera. And however, spitting remnants of his oral exploration were left imprinted on the monkey head cube camera. So the babies, white. I need the video, but I need the video, please. So I'm just going to share, I've got two short videos that I want to share with you, just so you have a sense of what it was to do the deep hanging out in the noodle pit. Oh.
Very long one. You can swing it around, isn't it? Oops. And it goes. Goes everywhere. Yeah? Boy. You wanna Jayne just grabbing for it. Eh? You take one by one. You have one by one. Some long ones, some short ones. They're all hanging, look. Okay. Wow. Is Max coming in here? Kasvina? Yeah. I'll hold him so I can feel the noodles. Oh. Going for the string, aren't you, Noah?
Oh, the whole dish. Of the butter.
Oh, where's it going? Where's it all going? Eh? Where's it all going? Look at this. Oh my goodness. I can hold him on my lap. Come on. Come on, Mister. Not sitting up yet. Oh. Come on, boy. Come on, boy. You can pick something as well, eh? You put it in your mouth as well, yeah? Oh.
You think you're expecting it to do something? Okay, so those babies, white English boys, greet me with their entire bodies, gravitate towards my crossed legs, leaning further towards me, smile enthusiastically, grab my hands, pass me noodles and giggle animatedly, fingering the sticky, slimy noodles, sticking them to my trousers and socks. Pointed wooden chopsticks anchored in chubby fists orbit the air in sometimes controlled intentional ways to poke the noodles, and at other times less controlled ways. Professional confidence, experience, wisdom enables this. Freedom to test boundaries, investigate, and become with the materials. A second educator in Bumblebee Room, also South Asian Muslim, in her early 30s, enters this noodle event. Both educators have worked at the nursery for over a decade. Sense a companionable ease, warmth, familiarity, which produces comfortable affective charges in these moments, framed by casual conversation and laughter. There's an easy ebb and flow to the tempo of the room. Chinese music is proclaimed to have a calming effect, declared similar to music that's played in the spa treatment rooms, laughter, shared by the noodle babies. So the visible thresholds between bumblebee and ladybird rooms demarcated this space. The materials, the humans, yet evoke an affective charge of longing and curiosity. Doors with full-length windows, some partially covered with posters and signs, magnetically drew toddlers to the window, faces squashed against the cold glass, pressing noses, snot, sticky hands, exposed tummies suckered against the cold pane of glass in a bid to reconnect with the space, the baby room, and the educators, the smells, the textures, the memories. Pushing noses up against the glass and tonguing the cold glass pane induces collective laughter on either side of the threshold, but not audible to those in the other room, but visible through the glass. I am told that when children transition from one room to the next, the doors are left open for a short period, around a couple of weeks, to allow the children to adjust to their new space. Just then, a cradle moves in the corner of the room, animated by a waking infant, a black British boy around 6 months old. Still dozy from a nap, the scene is surveyed. With enthusiastic encouragement roused from slumber by a makeshift spinning top assembled from the large transparent wok lid and a nearby ball. Hailed by the whirring, gliding, accelerated rotation of the spinning top, transfixed, senses consumed by the sound and the motion. Meanwhile, I noticed the unconscious reconfiguration of my own body taking me back to another time and place as one of the noodle babies topples forward, a soft landing provided by bath mats and cushion, but left beached due to adult-child ratios. The toppled baby finds a way to my crossed legs. My body contorts to provide a frame. The space provided by adult crossed legs acts in the same way as the right-angled cushions. I'm reminded how time, space, place, experience is etched corporeally. The material is inscribed in and on the body in ways that are largely imperceptible. I unconsciously and instinctively move around the needs of the baby and become with the space. My senses are further transported back in time to re-experience my body becoming a frame for this pre-walking baby to stand and dance a jig. The inability to stand unaided transforms my upper body. Notably, my arms become a frame to support this pursuit. An unwillingness, disinterest in sitting any longer was felt through the strength and determination to continue to stand upright. And this is transferred to my biceps. So this willful, determined, intuitive action reliant upon my compliance. Noodle flipping and lassoing continues just out of view. Meanwhile, I encountered the baby I had become with articulating noodle moves with his entire body. So we could ask ourselves, what do noodles make possible? What intensities do they induce, negate and condone following Liz Jones? And what do they do to our understandings of diversity? So there's another video. It's the bottom one. So this is the scene I've just described, and then, yeah.
It's going round and round. It's spinning. Going round and round. Hey, having lots of fun. Hey. Can't believe how much you've eaten, Jayne.
So this video footage of the spinning top wok lid ball and its affective charges are captured in a very precise moment. But the educator abruptly interrupts the whirring, accelerated rotation with the bash, 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 the abrupt, intrusive, brutal, disrupting sound of chopstick on spinning top. The chopstick audibly jars, and ultimately the motion and sound and the baby's mesmerised immersion with it is extinguished. And each time I watch this, I'm not quite sure why, but I physically wince. It's just the bash, bash, bash. And why does it produce that affective charge? And what work was the spinning top doing? And what more did children learn from the adult orchestration and demonstration of how things work or sound? What drives a human-centric compulsion to intervene the whole time? And what might happen if matter, space, and the emergent affective intensities acted more firmly as pedagogue? So pedagogical imperatives, curriculum frameworks, and dominant discourses about children are circulating the whole time in these micro moments. And taking up new materialist practices of off-the-beaten-path method and tentacular thought might allow for a curious practice for looking at the world with children and their entanglements rather than at. With a new materialist sensibility in play, educators might engage in worldly practices that allow a deep immersion into the lives of children and how they engage with situations, matter, and relational entanglements to reach other more expansive but possibly less certain ideas about diversity. So taking the noodles or the wok lid or the bath mat, or in fact any seemingly unremarkable and routine material within and enabling cultural diversity environments, invites questions that agitate deep thoughtfulness and wayfaring practices, such as who has touched it, what has touched it, where has it been, how many miles has it travelled, how did it make its way into the nursery, what is the evidence base to support its existence in early childhood contexts, as a learning device, as a safe toy. Where does matter take us, and how does matter come to matter? What can we do with the mattering that matter does? So deep hanging out and off the beaten path practices and tentacular thinking allow these materials, discursive entanglements, to tell different stories, to open out where Chinese New Year might take us. The materials are more than objects, more than symbolic representations, and the children's entanglements with them are multiple and interconnected at so many levels, from history to colonialism to capitalism and globalization, to gender inequalities and manufacturing practices, to food waste and the environment, to spa treatments and domestic labour. Presenting us with boundless trouble, but trouble that we must stay with. It's not enough to seek quick fixes and easy solution. We do not face problems, we face matters of concern, following Haraway. Considering the material-semiotic-discursive and affective entanglement of noodles, chopsticks, oversized cushions, legal duties, the human body, spit, music, glass thresholds, cameras, bath mats and dried-on food, daily routines, curriculum frameworks, pedagogical observations, food practices, and on, insist that associations and traceable attachments are accounted for so that early education can be understood as more than an exclusively human endeavour, and through which diversity can be understood as multiple processes of multi-layered becomings. The possibilities that emerge allow Chinese year to be thought, figured, felt in more sustained and immersed ways, where responsibility can be exercised towards all elements in an assemblage. The materialised reconfiguration of diversity offered in this paper as something that's sensed and storied is, of course, open to multiple interpretations. And indeed, I fought hard against an immediate instinct to deconstruct and critique what was represented. However, resisting this urge to go to familiar places theoretically and politically opened up other possibilities. For example, I reflect upon how social class, gender, and race are playing out in this scenario. The analysis that I could make of the gendered labour, the female educators, the domestic cleaning that will be necessary to pick each of those dried-on noodles from the bath mats, the intense physical labour involved in this form of women's work, the maternal discourses that circulate and frame the nature of the work. The primacy of risk discourses, demands for health and safety that undermine the trust in and autonomy of the educator. The prevent duty, omnipresent, hanging in the air, and inflecting the practices of these South Asian Muslim educators in imperceptible ways. That is not to claim that these foci of analysis fall out of view, far from it. They are the matters of concern that must be kept in view. But by working with feminist new materialist approaches, the starting point becomes materiality and entanglements rather than a focus on the human subject, which invites other stories, opportunities to figure through the event, the entanglements, the assemblage as fleeting, fluid, shifting, co-constituted rather than fixed. So diversity, cultural identity, race, ethnicity do not reside in the human subject. Instead, diversity can be understood as more confederate, distributed and worldly. The end.
Thank you, Jayne. We've certainly used all of our time. It's been fascinating and captivating in terms of being in the audience and listening to your research and the methodology that you use, and that idea of radical curiosity, I think I find really intriguing. I've been an early childhood teacher, or was for 7 years, a long time ago, and in recent years I've given the odd speech or two to early childhood teachers and other policymakers and system leaders, and I've always sort of harked back on the idea that if we got early childhood right, we could change everything that's happening in the world that suddenly doesn't seem to be the way that we need it to be. And I think your idea of suspending judgment and using those micro events to really focus on ways of learning and opening up opportunities, I think is a fascinating way to address the diversity and inclusion. And I refer back to the idea that if we got early childhood right, perhaps we wouldn't be worried so much about the lack of diversity and lack of inclusion that we have in the adult world. I also wanted to comment on the quality of your presentation. I always sit in the audience admiring people who are able to stand up and be able to captivate an audience and tell a story that really generates with everyone in the audience, including the seeing eye dog there. And I'm not sure that he was suffering from radical curiosity, but he was certainly of interest. It was of interest to him and didn't faze you a bit. So can I thank you for privileging us and giving us your time and being available to provide this Dean's Lecture. It's something that we will always remember, but we've changed our gifts from being a bottle of wine or a box of chocolates to what I like to refer to as a trophy. But we want you to remember how much we enjoyed this night. So without any further ado, on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to thank you and ask for people to join with me in giving you a round of applause.
Oh my God.
Here's your trophy.
Wow.